The neon "Open 24 hours" sign at Mel's Diner buzzed and flickered, its red glow reflecting off the puddles in the nearly empty parking lot. The air smelled of approaching rain, mixing with the ever-present aroma of coffee and grilled onions that seemed permanently embedded in the building's walls. Inside, Olivia Carter's arms burned as she scrubbed dried ketchup from the counter's surface. The clock above the kitchen window read 1:27 a.m., its steady ticking a reminder of another early shift lurking just hours away. Her feet throbbed, inside her worn sneakers, and she could feel a blister forming on her right heel where the back of her shoe had rubbed the skin raw. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that emphasized the dark circles under her eyes. Only 2 customers remained: a truck driver nursing his 3rd cup of coffee, and a college student surrounded by textbooks and empty energy drink cans. Olivia pulled her phone from her apron pocket, checking for messages from Mrs. Rodriguez, her elderly neighbor who watched Leo on late nights. The screen showed nothing but a weather alert warning of thunderstorms. She pictured her 7-year-old son sleeping peacefully in his Spider-Man pajamas, unaware that his mother was running on fumes and determination. The monthly bills lay heavy in her thoughts: rent due in 10 days, Leo's after-school program, payment pending, and the refrigerator making that worrying noise that screamed, "expensive repair." Her last paycheck had barely covered groceries and utilities, leaving her checking account balance hovering dangerously close to double digits. The vibration of her phone against the counter startled her so badly she dropped her cleaning rag. Rachel's name flashed on the screen. Her sister never called this late unless something was wrong. Liv. Rachel's voice cracked, thick, with emotion. "You need to come to Chicago, now." The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, too harsh. Olivia's fingers gripped the counter's edge until her knuckles turned white. "What happened?" "It's Dad." Rachel's breath hitched. "His heart. They're saying it's bad this time, really bad. The doctors—" She paused, composing herself. "They're saying if we want to see him, we need to come soon." The way words hit Olivia like a physical blow, forcing the air from her lungs. Their father had been battling heart problems for years, each episode a little worse than the last. But Rachel's tone carried a finality that made this different. This wasn't just another hospital stay or routine procedure. "I'll figure it out," Olivia said, her mind already racing through impossible calculations. She needed a flight, the cheapest one possible, which meant uncomfortable seats and terrible hours. She needed someone to watch Leo, and the thought that followed made her stomach churn. Mark. Her ex-husband was her only option, despite being as reliable as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. Mark Sho, who showed up for visitation when it suited him. Mark, who had missed Leo's last 2 birthday parties with barely an excuse. Mark, who still somehow managed to make her feel like she was the one failing their son. With trembling hands, she untied her apron and grabbed her purse from beneath the counter. Jerry, the night cook, took one look at her face and nodded. "Go. I'll tell Mike what happened." The next hour passed in a blur of motion and anxiety. She booked the cheapest red-eye flight she could find, rushed home to throw some clothes into a duffel bag, and woke Leo just long enough to carry him, still half asleep, to Mark's apartment building. Her ex-husband answered the door in basketball shorts and a wrinkled t-shirt, his hair mussed from sleep. The smell of stale beer wafted from his apartment. "This better be good, Liv," he said, leaning against the doorframe with an expression that suggested he was already thinking about how to use this favor against her. She explained the situation in clipped sentences, handed over Leo's backpack with his school supplies, and pressed a kiss to her son's forehead. "I'll be good for Daddy, okay? Mommy will be back soon." The drive to Toronto Pearson International Airport felt endless. Every red light was an eternity, every late-night driver an obstacle. By the time she parked in long-term parking, another expense she couldn't afford, her hands were shaking from exhaustion and worry. The airport terminal buzzed with the peculiar energy unique to late-night travel. Fluorescent lights reflected off polished floors, and the smell of overpriced coffee mingled with the antiseptic scent of cleaning supplies. Security was mercifully quick at this hour, though Olivia's tired fumbling with her shoes and laptop earned her an impatient sigh from the TSA agent. Her gate was at the far end of the terminal, naturally. Each step felt heavier than the last as she trudged past closed shops and darkened cafes. The exhaustion of being awake for nearly 24 hours straight was catching up, making her movements sluggish and her thoughts fuzzy. Her seat assignment was exactly what she expected. From a last-minute budget ticket, 32E, middle seat, near the back of the plane, she found her row occupied on one side by an elderly woman who smelled of lavender and peppermints, and on the other by a man who looked comically out of place in economy class. He wore a charcoal blazer that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, the fabric clearly expensive even to Olivia's untrained eye. His dark hair was styled in that effortless way that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget, and even sitting in the cramped airplane seat, he maintained an air of easy confidence that spoke of boardrooms and business deals. Not that any of it mattered. Olivia's only concern was staying awake long enough to get through takeoff. She squeezed past the elderly woman, who smiled kindly and pulled her knitting needles closer to make room. The businessman shifted his legs slightly, but otherwise remained focused on something on his phone screen. The seat felt impossibly narrow, or maybe she was just too aware of the warmth radiating from the stranger beside her. She buckled her seatbelt with clumsy fingers and tried to find a comfortable position that didn't involve touching either of her seatmates. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, discussing weather conditions and flight time, but the words blurred together in Olivia's exhausted mind. She fought to keep her eyes open as the plane taxied down the runway. But the gentle vibration of the engines combined with her bone-deep fatigue proved too powerful. Her head grew heavy, her neck muscles refusing to hold it upright any longer. She tried to lean toward the window, toward the elderly woman who had already shown kindness, but exhaustion had other plans. Slowly, imperceptibly, she drifted sideways until her head came to rest against something firm and warm. The last thing she registered before sleep claimed her completely was a faint scent of expensive cologne and clean laundry. And the stranger, whose shoulder now served as her pillow, didn't move away. Consciousness returned to Olivia in layers. First came the warmth, solid and steady against her cheek. Then the scent, a sophisticated blend of sandalwood and something crisp, like fresh air after rain. Finally, the mortifying realization of exactly where and on whom she had fallen asleep. Her eyes snapped open, and she jerked upright so quickly that her seatbelt dug into her hip. The businessman, her unwitting pillow, turned to face her, and Olivia's embarrassment deepened. In the harsh morning light filtering through the airplane windows, she could see him clearly for the first time. Strong jawline, intelligent dark eyes, and the kind of features that belonged on magazine covers. Perfect, just perfect. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." The words tumbled out as her face burned hot enough to fry an egg. Her fingers twisted in the hem of her wrinkled hoodie, the same one she'd worn during her shift at the diner, she realized with growing horror. His lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "No need for apologies." His voice was deep and smooth, with the kind of cultured accent that spoke of private schools and old money. I don't usually," she gestured vaguely, "use strangers as pillows." "I gathered as much," he replied, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Though I have to admit, it's the most peaceful flight I've had in years." Before Olivia could process that statement, he reached for his phone. That's when she saw it. Just a glimpse, but enough to make her stomach drop through the floor of the plane. A photo, on his screen, of them, her, sound asleep against his shoulder, him, looking not at the camera but at her, with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their descent into Chicago. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs as the plane began its approach. She needed to say something, to ask about the photo, but the words stuck in her throat. The businessman, whoever he was, tucked his phone away and straightened his already immaculate blazer. As they taxied to the gate, Olivia caught snippets of whispered conversations from nearby passengers, along with more than a few curious glances in their direction. Something was very, very wrong. The moment Olivia's phone reconnected to service in O'Hare International Airport, it exploded with notifications. The constant buzzing made it feel like an angry hornet trapped in her hand. Rachel. OMG Liv, you're trending? Mandy from work. Girl. Check Twitter now. Mike, her boss. Need to discuss recent developments. Call ASAP. Her stomach churned as she opened Instagram. The photo hit her like a punch to the gut. Professional quality, perfectly framed. Her sleeping face looked peaceful, almost vulnerable against the shoulder of the man she now knew to be Robert Sinclair, CEO of Sinclair Hotels and one of North America's most eligible bachelors. The caption beneath the photo, posted by a verified entertainment news account, read, "Billion-dollar bachelor Robert Sinclair's mystery woman. Sources say the unknown beauty caught catching Z's with the hotel magnate is not his usual type. Exclusive details coming soon." The comments section was a war zone. Gold digger alert. Actually kinda sweet. Look at his face. Who is she? Anyone know? Bet this was staged. Everything with these rich guys is fake. Olivia's hands shook as she lowered the phone. The fluorescent airport lights suddenly seemed too bright. The terminal too crowded. She needed air. She needed to think. Her phone rang again. Mark. Care to explain why our son's mother is all over the internet? His voice dripped with calculated concern. This kind of attention isn't good for Leo. Olivia's blood ran cold. She knew that tone. The one he used when he thought he had leverage. Mark, don't. Don't what? Don't worry about our son being exposed to this kind of media circus. Don't question your judgment. You've never cared about custody before, she hissed, drawing curious looks from passing travelers. Don't pretend this is about Leo's well-being. Maybe it's time I started caring more, he replied smoothly. You, a judge, might be interested in how you're spending your nights these days. The call ended, leaving Olivia standing frozen in the middle of the terminal. Her father's critical condition momentarily overshadowed by this new threat to everything. She held dear. A text message lit up her screen. An unknown number. Mr. Carter, this is Sarah Monroe, Mr. Sinclair's personal assistant. He would like to meet with you as soon as possible to discuss the current situation. A car is waiting outside door 3B. Please let me know if you need assistance locating it. Olivia stared at the message, her mind racing. She had a choice to make. Face this mess alone, or accept help from the very person who had inadvertently caused it. The answer, she realized, might determine not just her future, but Leo's as well. The hotel bar was a study in understated luxury. All dark wood, soft leather, and amber lighting that made even the ice in Olivia's water glass look expensive. She sat in a corner booth, her duffel bag stuffed awkwardly beneath the table, feeling every bit like the proverbial fish out of water. The hostess had given her outfit, still the same clothes from her diner shift, a subtle once-over before leading her to this secluded spot. Now, Olivia watched condensation drip down her water glass, trying not to think about how many hours she'd have to work to afford even one drink in a place like this. Robert Sinclair arrived exactly on time, his presence immediately commanding attention without seeming to try. He'd changed since the flight, now wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than her annual rent, yet something in his bearing suggested he would have carried the same authority in jeans and a t-shirt. "Miss Carter," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. A waiter materialized instantly, setting down a glass of amber liquid that Olivia suspected cost more than her weekly grocery budget. "Mr. Sinclair." She aimed for professional but heard the strain in her voice. "I assume this is about damage control?" Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, at her directness. "Partially," he admitted, studying her with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. "Though I think we both know this. Situation has evolved beyond simple PR management." "You mean because my ex is threatening to use it to take my son?" The words came out sharper than intended, but Robert didn't flinch. Instead, his expression hardened slightly, a glimpse of the businessman who had built an empire. "Tell me about Mark," he said quietly. So she did. She told him about the missed visitations, the sporadic child support payments, the way Mark treated parenthood like an occasional hobby, and now how he saw this viral photo as leverage. Robert listened without interrupting, his fingers tracing patterns in the condensation on his glass. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Let me help," he said finally. Olivia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Help how? Throw money at the problem. That's not how real life works for people like me." "No," he agreed, leaning forward slightly. But it is how the world works for people like Mark. He's opportunistic, looking for a payday. Let me handle it. Why? The question burst out before she could stop it. Why would you help me? Robert's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Because I was on that plane too, Olivia. I could have moved when you fell asleep. I could have stopped that photo from being taken. I didn't. That makes this partly my responsibility. And partly mine for falling asleep on a stranger. For trusting someone, even unconsciously, he corrected. That's not a fault. It's human. The following morning found Olivia in Northwestern Memorial Hospital's ICU waiting room, trying to focus on her father's condition despite the constant buzz of her phone. Rachel sat beside her, scrolling through social media, coverage of what people were calling the Sleeping Beauty scandal. This is insane, Rachel muttered, showing Olivia another article. They're analyzing your body language while you were literally unconscious. Before Olivia could respond, a tall woman in an impeccable pantsuit approached them. Ms. Carter, I'm Alexandra Bennett from Caldwell & Associates. Olivia recognized the name, one of Chicago's top law firms. Mr. Sinclair sent you? He retained our services on your behalf, yes. Alexandra sat down, pulling out a sleek leather portfolio. I understand we're dealing with a potential custody issue. For the next hour, Alexandra took detailed notes about Mark's history of inconsistent parenting, documented every missed visit and late support payment. She asked pointed questions about his lifestyle, his employment history, his relationships. Mr. Williams doesn't have a case, Alexandra concluded, her tone matter-of-fact. But he's counting on the media attention to pressure you into a settlement. We won't let that happen. As if on cue, Olivia's phone lit up with another call from Mark. Alexandra held out her hand. May I? Olivia handed over the phone, watching as the lawyer answered with professional courtesy. Mr. Williams, this is Alexandra Bennett representing Ms. Carter. All future communication should be directed through my office. The look on Alexandra's face suggested Mark's response was less than professional. Mr. Williams, she continued, her voice taking on a steel edge, before you continue, you should know that we have documented evidence of your inconsistent visitation history, multiple missed support payments, and what could be construed as attempted extortion. Would you like to reconsider your approach? The silence that followed was telling. After ending the call, Alexandra handed back the phone. He'll back down, she said confidently. Men like that always do when faced with actual consequences. Olivia felt tears pricking at her eyes, from relief, from exhaustion, from the surreal nature of it all. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me, Alexandra replied. Standing. Thank Mr. Sinclair. Though, she paused, a knowing look crossing her face. I don't think this is just about making amends for a viral photo. After the lawyer left, Rachel turned to Olivia with raised eyebrows. Okay, spill. What's really going on between you and this billionaire? Nothing, Olivia insisted, but even she heard the uncertainty in her voice. Because the truth was, she didn't know anymore. Everything had happened so fast, the flight, the photo, his offer of help, and underneath it all, there was something else. Something she wasn't ready to examine too closely. A nurse appeared in the doorway, interrupting her thoughts. Your father's awake, she announced with a smile. He's asking for you both. Olivia stood, pushing thoughts of Robert Sinclair aside. Right now, family came first. Everything else, the media circus, Mark's threats, and her complicated feelings about a certain CEO, would have to wait. The steady beep of heart monitors filled the hospital room as Olivia sat beside her father's bed, holding his hand. The past week had been a roller coaster of emotions. Fear as they waited for him to regain consciousness. Relief when he finally opened his eyes, and now cautious optimism as his condition slowly improved. You look tired, sweetheart, her father said, his voice still raspy from the breathing tube. Olivia managed a small smile. I'm fine, Dad. Just focus on getting better. But the truth was, she was exhausted, Splitting her time between the hospital, fielding calls from Alexandra about the custody situation, and trying to manage the ongoing media attention had left her running, on fumes. A soft knock on the door interrupted their conversation. To Olivia's surprise, Robert stood in the doorway, looking slightly out of place in the sterile hospital setting, despite his usual impeccable appearance. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his eyes meeting Olivia's with a warmth that made her pulse quicken. Her father's eyebrows rose. "You must be the young man I've been hearing about on the news." Robert stepped into the room, extending his hand. "Robert Sinclair, sir. I wanted to check on Olivia and see if there was anything you or your family needed." As Robert and her father fell into easy conversation, Olivia found herself studying the billionaire CEO. There was a genuineness to his concern that caught her off guard. This wasn't the calculated move of a businessman managing a PR crisis. This was something else. Later, as they walked together through the hospital garden, Olivia needing fresh air, Robert insisting on accompanying her, she finally voiced the question that had been nagging at her. "Why are you really here, Robert?" He was quiet. For a moment, his hands in his pockets as they strolled past a small fountain. "Would you believe me if I said I was worried about you?" Olivia stopped, turning to face him. "I'm not sure what to believe anymore. This whole situation is so far outside my normal life." Robert's expression softened. "I know, and I'm sorry for the part I played in complicating things. But Olivia..." He took a step closer, his voice low. "I can't stop thinking about you. About that flight. It wasn't just a photo op or a PR stunt. It was real." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to let her guard down, to trust this man who had turned her world upside down. But reality came crashing back as her phone buzzed with another news alert about their relationship. "I can't do this, Robert," she said, taking a step back. "My life is complicated enough without adding a media circus romance to the mix." He nodded, respecting her space but looking far from defeated. "I understand, but I'm not going anywhere. Olivia, when you're ready to talk, really talk, I'll be here." As she watched him walk away, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed walls were starting to crumble. 2 weeks later, Olivia stood in the kitchen of her small Toronto apartment, surrounded by the familiar sense of home, lemon cleaner, the lavender air freshener Rachel had given her, and the comforting aroma of coffee brewing. Her father was home from the hospital, on the mend with Rachel staying to help out. The custody issue with Mark had been resolved, thanks to Alexandra's skillful handling. The media frenzy had died down to occasional speculation. Everything should have felt normal again. So why did she feel so unsettled? Leo's laughter drifted from the living room where he was engrossed in a video game. The sound grounded her, reminding her of what was truly important. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Robert. "Thinking of you. Hope you're settling back in okay. Still here if you want to talk." Olivia stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the reply button. In the weeks since their conversation in the hospital garden, Robert had been present but not pushy. He'd check in every few days with a simple text, never demanding a response. A knock at the door interrupted her indecision. She opened it to find Mrs. Rodriguez, her elderly neighbor, holding a casserole dish. "Olivia, dear, I made too much lasagna. I thought you and Leo might enjoy some." As Olivia thanked her, Mrs. Rodriguez peered around the apartment with grandmotherly concern. "You look tired, mija. Are you getting enough rest?" "I'm fine," Olivia assured her. But the kind woman's scrutiny made her realize just how exhausted she truly was. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Olivia found herself staring at her reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed different, older perhaps, more weathered, but also stronger somehow. She thought about the past month, the fear of losing her father, the fight for her son, the unexpected support from a man she barely knew. She thought about the life she'd built, the sacrifices she'd made, and the dreams she'd put on. Hold, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder, what if she took a chance? What if she allowed someone else to shoulder some of the burden? What if there was more to life than just surviving from paycheck to paycheck? With a deep breath, she picked up her phone and typed out a reply to Robert. "I think I'm ready to talk. Really talk." As she hit send, Olivia felt something shift inside her. It wasn't a decision, not yet, but it was an opening. A willingness to explore possibilities she'd long since written off. She walked into the living room, watching Leo's face light up with excitement as he played. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. Her son would always be her priority. But maybe, just maybe, there was room in her life for something more. The upscale cafe in downtown Toronto buzzed with the quiet chatter of business lunches and clinking cutlery. Olivia smoothed her hands over her nicest blouse, a far cry from her usual diner uniform, and tried to quell the butterflies in her stomach. Robert arrived precisely on time, his presence drawing subtle glances from other patrons. He smiled when he saw her, a genuine warmth in his eyes that made Olivia's nervousness ease slightly. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as he sat down across from her. "Thank you for being patient," Olivia replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. They ordered, Olivia opting for a simple sandwich, Robert for the chef's special, and fell into an unexpectedly comfortable conversation. They talked about her father's recovery, about Leo's latest obsession with space exploration, about the book Robert was currently reading. It wasn't until their plates were nearly empty that Robert broached the subject they'd both been dancing around. "Olivia," he began, his tone serious but gentle. "I meant what I said at the hospital. I can't stop thinking about you, about us, about what could be." Olivia took a deep breath. "Robert, our worlds are so different. You run a multi-billion-dollar company. I'm a single mom working double shifts at a diner. How could this possibly work?" He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Do you remember what you said to me? That first night in Chicago, you said, 'That's not how real life works for people like me.' But Olivia, that's exactly the point. I don't want to change your life. I want to be part of it. The real parts, the messy parts, all of it." His words hit her like a physical force, breaking through the carefully constructed walls she'd built around her heart. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "So am I. But I think what we could have is worth being a little scared for. Don't you?" In that moment, looking into his eyes, Olivia made a decision. She was tired of playing it safe, of letting fear dictate her choices. With a deep breath, she turned her hand over, intertwining her fingers with his. "Okay," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Let's see where this goes." The next few months were a whirlwind of adjustments and new experiences. Robert seamlessly integrated himself into Olivia and Leo's life, never pushing too hard, but always present. He showed up at Leo's school science fair, genuinely impressed by the 7-year-old's model solar system. He brought soup when Olivia caught the flu, insisting on watching Leo so she could rest. He even rolled up his sleeves and helped repaint the living room when Olivia mentioned wanting a change. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments of culture clash, like when Robert casually suggested flying to New York for dinner, not realizing that spontaneous cross-border trips weren't exactly a normal occurrence for Olivia. Or when Olivia hesitated to let him buy Leo a new bike, struggling with her pride and independence. They worked through each hurdle together, learning to communicate and compromise. Robert learned to appreciate the simple joys of home-cooked meals and movie nights on the couch. Olivia learned to accept help and allow herself small luxuries, without feeling guilty. One evening, as they sat on Olivia's small balcony watching the sunset over the city skyline, Robert turned to her with a serious expression. "I have a proposition for you," he said. A hint of nervousness in his voice. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I'm opening a new hotel here in Toronto, and I want you to run the restaurant." Olivia's jaw dropped. "Robert, I'm a waitress, not a restaurant manager." He shook his head, taking her hands in his. "You're so much more than that, Olivia. You have an incredible work ethic, fantastic people skills, and more real-world experience than any MBA fresh out of school. I've seen how you handle the diner during rush hour. You were born for this." "But no buts," he interrupted gently. "This isn't charity or special treatment. It's an opportunity I'd offer to anyone with your skills. The fact that I love you is just a bonus. Olivia froze, her heart skipping a beat. You love me? Robert's eyes widened, realizing what he'd said. Then he smiled, squeezing her hands. Yes, I love you, Olivia Carter. Every strong, stubborn, amazing part of you. Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes as the full weight of the moment hit her. This man, this incredible, patient, loving man, saw her, really saw her. Not just as a waitress or a single mom, but as a whole person with dreams and potential. I love you too, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. As Robert pulled her into his arms, Olivia felt a sense of peace wash over her. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would still be challenges, still be moments of doubt, but for the first time in years, she felt truly hopeful about the future. A future where she could be both a devoted mother and a successful professional. A future where love didn't mean losing herself, but finding a partner to share life's journey. A future that had started with an accidental nap on an airplane and blossomed into something beautiful and real. 2 years later, the rooftop restaurant of the Sinclair Toronto was abuzz with activity. Soft jazz played in the background as waitstaff moved efficiently between tables, carrying plates of expertly prepared cuisine. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline glittered in the twilight. Olivia stood near the host stand, surveying the scene with a mixture of pride and amazement. Her restaurant, her baby, was thriving. The past 2 years had been a whirlwind of hard work, learning, and growth, but seeing the results made every sleepless night worth it. Mom! Leo's excited voice caught her attention. She turned to see her now 9-year-old son rushing towards her, Robert following close behind with an amused smile. Guess what? Leo bounced on his toes. I got an A on my science project. Mr. Thompson said it was the best in the class. Olivia pulled him into a hug. That's fantastic, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. Robert reached them, placing a gentle hand on Olivia's back. I think this calls for a celebration. How about ice cream after dinner? As Leo cheered, Olivia met Robert's gaze, feeling a rush of warmth. This man, who had seamlessly become part of their family, still looked at her with the same adoration as he had that day on her tiny balcony. Later that night, after Leo was tucked in bed, Olivia and Robert stood on the balcony of their new home, a compromise between his desire to provide and her need for independence. Happy? Robert asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Olivia leaned back into his embrace, watching the city lights twinkle. More than I ever thought possible, she replied honestly. She thought about how far they'd come, from that first accidental encounter on a plane to building a life together. It hadn't always been easy, but every challenge had only made them stronger. As Robert's hand found hers, his fingers brushing over the engagement ring he'd given her just a month ago, Olivia smiled. This was more than just a happy ending. It was a beautiful beginning of a partnership, a family, and a future filled with endless possibilities. The story that had started with an unexpected nap was now a waking dream, one that Olivia never wanted to end. What did you think of the story? Leave a comment and a review about this story. If you were moved and enjoyed our work, feel free to help us continue producing. I invite you to click on our link in the first pinned comment. Now, 2 buttons will appear. One to subscribe, if you haven't already, and the other to watch other interesting stories. Choose one. Thank you for watching this far. See you soon.